The prestigious Hamilton Hall at Columbia University hummed with intellectual energy on a crisp autumn morning. The annual National Student Policy Forum had drawn hundreds of the brightest young minds from across America's top universities. The historic auditorium, with its ornate wooden panels and grand architecture, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the debates to come. Among the sea of casual college attire and laptop-clutching students, one figure stood out: Barron Trump. Dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, he sat quietly in the third row, observing the proceedings with careful attention. Unlike many of his peers who announced their presence with loud voices and dramatic gestures, Barron carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of careful upbringing and deep self-awareness. The morning sessions had featured structured debates on climate policy, economic reform, and international relations. But it was the afternoon's open forum that promised the most excitement, a platform where any student could take the stage and present their views, while others could rise to challenge them. As the lunch break ended, students filed back into the hall, their excited chatter filling the air with anticipation. Dr. James Harrison, the distinguished professor of political science who moderated the event, stepped up to the podium. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority as he adjusted the microphone. Welcome back, everyone. Our open forum session begins now. Remember our rules: respect, civility, and evidence-based arguments. Who would like to start? A hand shot up immediately from the middle section. Emily Carter, known across the collegiate debate circuit for her fierce rhetoric and uncompromising progressive stance, practically jumped from her seat. Her purple hair and multiple piercings made her stand out almost as much as Barron's suit, but in a completely different way. "Ah, Ms. Carter," Dr. Harrison nodded. "The floor is yours." Emily strode to the podium with the confidence of someone who had never lost a debate. Her Doc Martens boots echoed against the wooden stage as she took position. Adjusting the microphone with practiced ease, she surveyed the room, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "Fellow students," she began, her voice clear and commanding, "we're here to discuss progress. But there's an elephant in the room we need to address: the suffocating grip of outdated generations on our nation's future." The room grew quiet. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Barron remained still, his expression unreadable, as he watched Emily build her argument. "Look around," she continued, her voice growing bolder with each word. "While we struggle with modern challenges, climate change, economic inequality, social justice, people over 50 still control our destiny. These traditionalists cling to their obsolete values, their precious faith, their so-called patriotism, their rigid family structures." Scattered applause erupted, encouraging her to push further. Emily's eyes blazed with triumph as she sensed the room's energy aligning with her message. "These people," her voice dripped with disdain, "these boomers who can barely use a smartphone, somehow still decide our future. They've had their time. It's time to admit that their generation is holding us back from true progress." The applause grew louder, drowning out the few murmurs of dissent. Emily was in her element now, feeding off the crowd's energy. She moved away from the podium, gesturing dramatically as she delivered her most controversial point yet. "What we need," she declared, her voice rising with conviction, "is an age limit on political participation. Why should someone who won't live to see the consequences of their choices have any say in our future?" The crowd's reaction intensified. Many students were now standing, cheering her on. Emily had mastered the art of playing to her audience, and she knew exactly which buttons to push. These people, with their obsession with God and guns, their "Make America Great Again" nostalgia — she made air quotes with her fingers — they're dinosaurs. Their America is dead, and it's time we buried it. Barron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained still, carefully noting each point she made. Around him, students were nodding enthusiastically, some even shouting words of agreement. "Their values," Emily scoffed, "family values, traditional values, these are just code words for resistance to progress. These people built their wealth on privilege and oppression, and now they lecture us about morality?" The applause was thunderous now. Emily's purple hair seemed to glow under the auditorium lights as she prepared her final thrust. I propose, her voice cut through the noise, that we start a movement. A movement to restrict voting rights and public office positions to those under 50. Let's face it, they had their chance. They messed it up. Now it's our turn. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his expression concerned. Does anyone wish to present a counter-argument? He asked, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Emily crossed her arms, satisfaction evident on her face. The room began to quiet, students looking around, wondering if anyone would dare challenge such a powerful presentation. Anyone? Dr. Harrison asked again, already reaching for his papers to move on. That's when a deep, clear voice cut through the silence. I would. The room fell dead silent. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. Emily's smirk widened as Barron Trump rose from his seat. The moment that would change everything had arrived. Emily's initial confidence turned to barely concealed contempt as Barron made his way to the podium. Well, well, she drawled into the microphone, stepping aside with an exaggerated flourish. Look who decided to grace us with his opinion. Daddy's boy himself. Scattered laughter rippled through the audience, but Barron's composed demeanor didn't waver. His tall frame and impeccable appearance created a striking contrast to Emily's deliberately casual style. As he approached the podium, his movements were unhurried and deliberate, displaying none of the nervous energy that typically accompanied student debaters. Thank you for your passionate presentation, Emily, he began, his voice steady and measured. But passion without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder, powerful but dangerous. Emily's smile flickered for a moment. She hadn't expected this calm, articulate approach. Most opponents either matched her aggressive style or crumbled under it. Barron was doing neither. You speak of progress, he continued, but true progress isn't built by tearing down those who came before us. It's built on their shoulders. He paused, letting his words sink in. When you say someone over 50 shouldn't have a voice in our future, do you realize you're talking about the very people who created the technology you use to research your arguments? Emily started to interrupt, but Barron held up a hand, his voice never losing its respectful tone. Please, you had your turn. I listened carefully to every word. The audience stirred. They weren't used to seeing Emily check so gracefully. Now Barron's voice took on a deeper resonance, filling the historic hall with authority that seemed beyond his years. Let's talk about what real progress looks like, he began. You mentioned smartphones. Did you know that many of the key innovations in your iPhone were developed by people who are now in their 60s and 70s? The same boomers you want to silence? Emily rolled her eyes. That's ancient history. Speaking of history, Barron smoothly interjected, let's talk about your claim that their America is dead. His voice took on an edge of steel beneath its polite exterior. The America they built provides the very platform you're using to attack them. The universities where we study, built by them. The prosperity that allows us to spend our time debating instead of struggling to survive, created by them. The freedom to speak your mind without fear, protected by them. The audience's attention was now fully focused on Barron. Even some of Emily's most vocal supporters were nodding thoughtfully. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, the earlier certainty replaced by something more contemplative. But they don't understand modern problems. Emily shot back, her voice rising with frustration. Really? Barron raised an eyebrow. The generation that lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, multiple economic crises, and the birth of the digital age doesn't understand complex problems? He paused for effect. They solve problems we haven't even learned about yet. Emily's face flushed, but she wasn't done. Their values? Barron's voice carried a quiet intensity. You mean like hard work, personal responsibility, and respect for others? The same values that built the greatest nation on earth? He gestured to the room. Look around you. Everything in this room, from the chairs you're sitting on to the democratic system that allows us to have this debate, was built by people who held those values. The crowd murmured, several students exchanging glances. Emily's supporters were growing noticeably quieter, the earlier certainty in their expressions replaced by thoughtful consideration. But here's what truly concerns me, Barron continued, his gaze sweeping the room. In the name of progress, you're advocating for the most regressive policy imaginable, discrimination based on age. Isn't it ironic that while claiming to fight for inclusion, you're calling for the exclusion of millions of American citizens? Emily's composure was visibly cracking. She hadn't expected this level of articulate opposition, and her usual tactics of mockery and dismissal were failing against Barron's measured reasoning. Let me make it even simpler, Barron said, his confidence growing with each word. Let's look at some of these outdated people you want to silence. Elon Musk, over 50. Bill Gates, over 60. The scientists working on cancer cures, many over 50. The professors who teach us, most over 50. My father, 78. He paused, letting each example land. Should we dismiss their contributions because of their age? The room had fallen completely silent, hanging on every word. The transformation was remarkable, from the raucous cheering of Emily's presentation to this intense, thoughtful attention. Oh, how touching! Emily's voice dripped with sarcasm, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. The privileged heir lectures us about innovation and hard work. She turned to the audience with a theatrical gesture. Notice how he conveniently mentions billionaires, the elite 1% that hoard wealth, while regular Americans struggle. Several students nodded vigorously. Emily was attempting to regain her footing by steering the debate back to familiar territory: class warfare and privilege. And since you brought up your father, she sneered, let's talk about the values you're so proud of. The values that divide families, that tell people who they can and can't love, that force outdated religious beliefs down our throats. Interesting, Barron interjected calmly, how you claim to champion diversity while mocking people's faith. Because their faith oppresses others, Emily shot back, her voice rising. Their traditional values are just tools of control. And you, she pointed accusingly at Barron, you're just another trust fund baby defending a system that keeps you on top. The crowd was energized again, many students cheering Emily's attack. But Barron's composed smile never wavered. This was the moment he had been waiting for, when emotion would reveal the weakness in her argument. Let's examine that claim, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. You say they're tools of control, yet these same values taught millions to fight for civil rights, to help their neighbors, to build communities. My trust fund? I've been volunteering at veteran shelters since I was 14. How many hours have you spent helping others, Emily? The room fell silent. Emily's triumphant expression flickered, but she wasn't done yet. That's not what you meant, Barron finished. It never is it? When facts don't match your narrative, you switch to personal attacks. Classic tactic of someone losing an argument. Don't you dare! Emily's voice cracked with rage. She stormed toward the podium, purple hair wild, finger jabbing the air. You think you can come here with your suit and your manners and your privilege, lecturing us about values? The room crackled with tension. Some students were standing now, feeding off Emily's anger, but others looked uncomfortable with her increasing hostility. You want to talk about helping others? She practically spat the words. Your family represents everything wrong with this country. The elite, the privileged, hiding behind traditional values, while real Americans suffer. She turned to the crowd, her voice rising to a fever pitch. Look at him, standing there like he belongs here, defending the very system that keeps us down. You know what? She spun back to Barron, her face contorted with fury. This freak doesn't deserve to be here. The words echoed through the suddenly silent room. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, clearly alarmed, but Barron raised a hand. It's okay, Professor, he said quietly, his composure unshaken. Then, turning to Emily with an almost sympathetic smile, he delivered the words that would change the entire tenor of the debate. You know what's interesting, Emily? When facts fail, you resort to shouting. When logic fails, you turn to insults. When reason fails, he paused, letting the moment hang. You show everyone exactly who you really are. Emily's face flushed deep red, but the fire in her eyes was flickering. I'm showing everyone the truth about people like you. No, Barron's voice was firm but gentle. You're showing everyone what happens when hatred masquerades as progress. You claim to fight discrimination while discriminating. You preach tolerance while showing none. You demand respect while disrespecting millions of Americans who built this country. The audience was completely still now, hanging on every word. The transformation in the room was palpable, from the earlier raucous cheering to this profound silence. But let me tell you what I see here, Barron continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. I see someone so consumed by ideology that she's forgotten a basic truth. Every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before. Emily tried to interrupt, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. You're twisting my... I'm quoting you directly, Barron replied smoothly. You called our elders dinosaurs. You mocked their faith. You ridiculed their sacrifices. And why? Because they don't share your worldview? That's not progressive. That's prejudice. He turned to address the entire room. You all just witnessed something remarkable today. You saw someone claim to champion diversity while attacking diversity of thought. Someone demanding inclusion while calling for the exclusion of millions. Someone preaching tolerance while showing absolute intolerance for different beliefs. Emily's face had lost all color now, her supporters shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of Barron's words seemed to press down on the entire room. But here's the most ironic part, Barron continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine concern. While you stand here demanding that we silence our elders, you're benefiting from their legacy. The very platform you're using to attack them, built by them. The freedoms you're exercising, protected by them. The education you're receiving, made possible by them. He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was deafening. So tell me, Emily. Barron's voice was almost gentle now. In your vision of progress, is there room for anyone who disagrees with you? Or is diversity only acceptable when it fits your narrative? Emily opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time since the debate began, no words came out. As the day drew to a close, something remarkable happened. Emily approached Barron as he was gathering his things. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by genuine humility. Barron, her voice was small, uncertain. Could I talk to you for a moment? He turned, and to her surprise, his face held no trace of anger or resentment. Instead, he smiled warmly. Of course. I'm so sorry, she struggled to find the right words. For everything I said, for how I acted. You know what's interesting about being our age? Barron replied thoughtfully. We're old enough to have strong convictions, but young enough to sometimes let those convictions blind us. It's actually pretty normal to get caught up in ideologies and passionate beliefs. That's exactly why the wisdom of older generations is so valuable. They've been exactly where we are. Emily stared at him, taken aback by his compassion. How are you so wise about all this? I've had good teachers, he smiled. People who taught me that true strength isn't about winning arguments. It's about building understanding. Our elders have seen these same battles, felt these same certainties, and learned these same lessons. We don't have to agree with everyone, but we do need to respect their journey. Overwhelmed by his kindness, Emily suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, Barron seemed surprised.